There is a lot of activity among Minnesota lawmakers right now at our Capitol as we are at around the halfway point of this regular legislative session. No longer having a budget deficit to fix certainly takes out a complicated playing card. But with that said, and having a surplus, a stalemate over money is not going to be the issue right now that it's been in the past, although money is an issue when it comes to funding for safety. With that said, plenty of other bills are being discussed before so many of the lawmakers and before votes are taken. Few of the main issues lawmakers are tackling right now include school suspensions for elementary students, criminal penalties regarding transgender student athletes, taxes, and the big one today, more on legalizing recreational marijuana. Our political expert, Blois Olson, who follows state politics more than, dare I say, Blois, even some lawmakers, joins me with analysis. Would that be a fair statement? Do you follow state politics more than some lawmakers, you think?
Maybe, but probably not.
I think you do.
Oh, thank you, Betsy.
A lot of the focus and what I just said was about recreational marijuana. We can talk about that in just a sec. Let's start, though, with the Safety Act because funding and spending the money on safety around the Chauvin trial is what's really taking a lot of time and energy up there.
Yeah, well, it's taking the energy of leaders. We haven't heard a lot about it on the floor since it failed in the House, but leadership is meeting behind the scenes trying to figure this out. And Senate Majority Leader Gazelka said he was optimistic that they would get something passed next week. Ultimately, the planning for security around the Chauvin trial is well underway, if not completed. And now it's just a matter of what is needed and to make sure that any other cities or counties that offer aid to Hennepin County and Minneapolis have the money from the state to be reimbursed for that. So I'm optimistic that that will get done next week.
Chief Arredondo came out saying that this won't be tolerated, that won't be tolerated, fires, violence, anything like that. How much does politics come into play before he comes out and makes a statement like that? I've got to imagine he's talking to the governor, public safety, other politicians.
Operation SafeNet is the operation that they've put this under for the Chauvin trial throughout the summer, related to the trial of the other officers as well. And yes, absolutely, Chief Arredondo is running point on that. But to send those messages now to show the force that they are showing and the protection that they are showing in Minneapolis is also to send a message that it's not going to be tolerated and it's going to be really hard to gather in large groups in downtown. The real question is, what happens in other parts of the city? And frankly, I wonder how much energy there's going to be during jury selection before the trial and just kind of how this builds. And I think they want to be prepared for every unknown to make sure that they don't have a repeat of last spring.
Back to the spending on how much will go toward security and safety. Does the governor, has he shown any backing up of the money that he wants to use from the state level? So what it comes down to, and people have been saying it's tax dollars and cities should have to pay for it. Does he show any signs that he's going to back away from that?
No, I don't think he's going to back away from it. He said he just wants to see what the legislature puts forward for a bill today. He addressed the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association today and talked about working together on that. And it's not a contentious issue for them. What's a contentious issue for them is who are they reporting to if they are part of this command during the trial? That's one of the biggest sticking points. And then also the idea that they would layer in police reform or criminal justice reform into this bill when the bill really is just about public safety.
Do we have any Democratic lawmakers from greater Minnesota who are saying the same thing Republicans are? No, do not use state money on this.
There haven't been that many to say that.
Okay.
The real issue within the Democratic Party has been some of the more liberal members who won't support the governor's plan unless it includes criminal justice reform and some of those other issues. I do know that there is starting to be some coalescing around the governor's emergency powers due to the pandemic, where rural Democrats are aligning themselves with Republicans. So it really is a patchwork of political alliances for this session.
Okay, I'm going to take a break. This is a good point to do that because what you brought up leads us to our next piece of this conversation, and that is the pandemic, spending. People or lawmakers who are breaking away from traditionally supporting the governor. Give me 2 minutes. We'll come back and talk about that. I'm continuing my conversation on all things Minnesota politics with our political analyst, Blois Olson. Blois, before the break, we were talking about the security, safety, money being spent because of the Chauvin trial. Let's shift that focus now to Democrats who are breaking alliance with their party and saying that they're with Republicans with the governor's emergency powers, and they want to see that they have more of a say instead of the governor saying this is how things are going to be in this pandemic. I think people expected to see that maybe even sooner.
Yeah, no, I think many people hoped to see it sooner. I think there were some possibilities sooner. But I think as our case numbers are down and the vaccines go out very quickly, that there begins to be more and more questions about why the governor needs that power. His powers right now are extended, I believe, for another week or two. Then I think there will be a big question. And one of the reasons is because the governor is going to need some legislative approvals to spend federal money. And in order to do that, they're going to kind of wind up negotiating on some things before. So now they've had the negotiation on the SAFE bill. They're going to have the negotiation on the interim budget, COVID, and then they're going to have the negotiation on the big budget. The idea that they can get all of that done in swift manner without a lot of frustration, I think is optimistic, but I think that all Democrat and Republican leaders want to avoid the end of session drama as much as possible.
Well, the good news is we probably won't be having as much drama about money because, like I said earlier, we have a surplus and not a deficit. With that, lawmakers are focusing on other bills. Legalizing recreational marijuana, criminal penalties regarding transgender athletics, things like that. I feel like I was a little surprised that we're putting so much focus on some of these other issues when we do have money discussions that need to be had on where that money is going to be spent to help out small businesses because of the pandemic. Where do you stand on that?
I consider those issues shiny object issues. They're issues that obstruct the real view of the job this session, which is the budget. But they get media attention. They get a lot of passion from people. They get coverage. And it allows these things that each side feels are important to, quote, get their hearing. Now, if we could get done with those hearings on issues that Republicans aren't going to go for a tax increase, Democrats aren't going to go for criminal penalties against transgender athletes. If we can get those out of the way in March, that means April and May may be focused on the budget, which ultimately is what's going to decide when this session ends.
Yeah, well, that's when things get hairy down to the wire, and then an end of session ends up like we've seen in the past with a lot of bickering and stalemates, that kind of thing. So I don't focus on those shiny objects as much. They're in the news. We talk about them because they're being discussed up at the state capitol. But that's why I'm asking, why aren't we hearing more about where this money is going to be spent, and why aren't more people questioning that?
You know, I think that it's a great question, Betsy. And I think one of the reasons is because those other issues are also populist, right? So look, marijuana and the legalization of it played a role in many races in this state last time. Democrats want to try to clear that up before 2022. Back to the spending. The budget committees are meeting and hearing the details. People can go to the legislative website and see those hearings taking place. All of them are being streamed this year. So those conversations are happening. I think it's the public posturing that gets really frustrating and why we couldn't get it done. Because I have confidence, Betsy, that if you and I had to figure out this budget, we could do it over dinner on the back of a napkin, and we wouldn't have to deal with those shiny objects.
Yeah, we could, because you would say what you think, and I think you're so darn smart. I'd be like, oh, that sounds good to me. I'm good with it. We're done.
Well, there's more to it than that, but thank you.
Let's shift a little bit on the federal level. In your morning take this morning, Representative Tom Emmer was quoted about, let's see, we'll win the majority we need to hold the ones we have and need at least 5. That's a quote. And what he's referring to are seats that need to be won in upcoming elections for Republicans in order to have the majority control so that agendas can get passed, right? So then they'd have the votes. When these types of quotes come out, I always backtrack a little bit and wonder whether it's a Republican saying it or a Democrat. When did these lawmakers take the focus off their constituents and voters and become so heavily ingrained in this is how many seats we need, let's focus all of our attention there so that we can pass our agenda, and they're not thinking about me and my needs in their district?
You know, it's part of the polarization and the hyperpolarization that we see is that the parties get really frustrated when they're not in power. It's the same reason, you know, there's these party divides on votes. But Representative Emmer and others have other roles. Not only do they represent their district, but in Representative Emmer's case, he's the leader of the Republican House Campaign Committee. And so that quote is from a national appearance with Politico over the last couple days, where he was talking about how Republicans could retake the majority. But you're right. They're raising money. They're recruiting candidates. And they're really trying to figure out some key ways in which they can get the majority back. The more interesting quote from Tom Emmer was, how do you feel about former President Trump running candidates against some of your incumbents? And he said, that's not helpful. And that's one of the storylines we'll follow to 2022.
Is that a shiny object, though, Blois?
Well, it is, except for when incumbents lose to challengers, which is happening more and more on both sides of the aisle.
You know, one of our federal lawmakers, Representative Angie Craig, whenever I see news releases come out from all of our lawmakers from Minnesota who are out in Washington, I'm seeing they want a headline a lot of times, right? A shiny object. But Representative Craig, and tell me what your thoughts are on this, she seems to stay in her lane trying to get these issues done for her constituents. She's one of the people I have such respect for in that, regarding that aspect.
You know, they're all personalities as well. And I think that Andrew Craig learned her district by running multiple times. She also knows she's going to be a target. And the all politics is local quote and rule is something that all of them try to follow, but Angie Craig probably follows it a little closer than the rest of them.
Do you have anything big coming down the pipeline? You working on anything? I know you talk to people and sometimes you come out with some breaking news that I need to tap your shoulder for. Anything coming up in the next week or so that you know of?
We might have one or two of those congressional challengers against incumbents coming out in the next week. And then we're really focused on the Chauvin trial.
Yeah.
It's going to be an international spectacle and kind of covering all the angles for that as how it impacts the news and obviously the politics of the state.
That is what I'm going to tap into you for starting next week, the politics of this trial. There's going to be plenty of media coverage on every other aspect. You and I will talk politics. How about that?
Sounds like a plan.
All righty, Blois Olson, my friend, thank you again, and I will talk to you next week.
See you, Betsy.